Hi everyone. In this portion we're going to explore the instrument itself so that we know how it's made, what the different parts are, the makeup, so that we can have it sounding excellent and understand why it sounds good when it sounds good and not when it doesn't, and more specifically tune it and arrange it and curate the instrument to sound how we want it to sound to suit whatever music we're playing with. So we'll get into taking it apart and seeing all the bits that make it up, and as well as culminating and understanding the whole process of tuning, which is a fine job, but something that's very important that we all have to know a little bit about how to tune the instrument. Essentially, historically, the instrument's been around since the mid-1800s. It was created by the French and existed in Europe for many years in a different format, where people would sit in a chair and have foot pumps beneath it that would bring the air into it and to blow through the reeds. And there were bigger harmoniums, and basically back then it was a way of having a more affordable option from a church organ that has the pipes. So it was something that people could have in their homes and in churches, and in the same way it was easy to transport, didn't need electricity, things like that. So the missionaries then that came over to India brought the instrument, and the people of the Indian subcontinent really dug it. And obviously Indian people don't sit on chairs much, as I also don't, and so they made this new adaptation so that it can rest on the floor and be sat with like this. And when electricity came more than 100 years ago into that scene of music instruments, then the electric organ took over. That was a more affordable and versatile instrument for the Europeans, but then the harmonium kept growing and the popularity kept growing to this day. And it's a very popular instrument in India and Pakistan and Afghanistan and Nepal and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, all the neighboring countries, of course. And for the reason that it doesn't take, you don't have to tune it before you play. It's got a loud resonance. It's very versatile in that way. But because it doesn't, you can't bend the notes per se, like a sarangi or a sitar or a bansuri or any of the traditional classical instruments. It's not considered a classical instrument because that use of the microtones, as you saw in the singing course, is essential to be able to reproduce the classical music using the ornamentations as such. So it's become an accompanying instrument with a lot of classical, but more used in semi-classical folk traditions, bhajans, qawwali, tumri, dadra, tapa, geet, and yeah, very important instrument. So first we're going to look at the different parts of it. Now obviously we have the keys, and this bit here is how we regulate the volume. Zoop. So if we have a thicker cloth on the top, then it'll dampen the sound more. But for qawwali we like the nice big open loud sound to keep up with the hard claps and everything. And some harmoniums have their wooden top, but I find having folded fabric, I can have a nice Sindhi shawl or a tinsel shawl and fold it as many times as I need, whether I'm singing classical or whether I'm singing qawwali, to suit that. And sometimes I'll just tear it off in the middle of a show to be really loud. And so this here is what we call the outer bellow that sucks air into it. And inside the body structure here, we have an internal bellow that will open up shortly that basically compresses the air, and there's springs pushing a flat piece of wood up, and that's what gives the reeds that we'll be seeing shortly the air to play. And it's important that all this stuff is well regulated to get the most amount of sound. Obviously you don't want to have to pump too hard, but you need enough air to push through the reeds to have that bright sound where they respond quickly, where the attack is good, as I was talking about previously in the Harmonium series. So we're going to open it up and see how to regulate that perfectly. Now harmoniums can be a little smaller and they can also be a little bigger, but this is the typical one. One of the specifics of the QAWWALI harmonium design is we don't have all these different knobs and levers to faff around with. There's the coupler, which is inside. You can't see it here, but when you press a note, it doubles it. So you have the 2 reeds resonating here, and then 2 more reeds, so you're having 4 reeds. So it gives that nice thick sound. Some harmoniums are set to couple below also. And often a lot of harmoniums will have knobs. So the knobs open up the bellows, and under here the bellows will be in 2 sections. So you have 1 set of reeds, whether they're female, bass, or male, 3 different octaves of reeds that can be used. You can choose which one, but when almost all the time, in most cases, you'll be just using all the reeds anyway. So it's a bit of kind of foolish faffing to have so many knobs. And these other knobs are for the drones here. Some harmoniums have like 10 knobs, and this plays the drones, so you can have a drone going. But if you want a drone, you can also just press the note you want and just click that over. But typically we don't play with the drone, or we have a tampura going, either electronic one or somebody else accompanying. A lot of harmoniums, there's the different genres. You have like the Calcutta harmonium, the Delhi harmonium, the Lahore harmonium, and for example, a lot of those big classical harmoniums that are the big classical harmoniums that have like the heavy wood and the collapsible ones, they'll have a lot less volume than a QAWWALI one here. And the ones often with like heaps of knobs and such, but they'll also have a scale changer, so you can, for example, only learn to play in C sharp, and then just if you have to accompany somebody in B or something, then you just click this thing down and it slides the reeds so that you're still playing in the shape of C sharp, but it's actually in B or whatever key you want. But in our tradition, we just keep it simple like this and very sleek, which I like. Now, so first we're going to just open it up and have a quick look inside. Now to do that, first we're just going to open up this front panel. I've made this little segment to use very basic tools without using all the fancy dancy stuff, so you don't have to go to a harmonium shop to pick up anything special. Taking off the front portion. Don't step on that later. I've done it a few times. And then opening up this middle band panel. Yep. Make sure you don't lose the screws. And then these 2 side portions here have to come out. It's fun stuff. Make sure you remember which one's which. There'll be like the non-painted side that goes against the body. That's how you know most easily. Okay, so now we've taken off these bits. And then we're going to open up the body here. So these are the big, I've replaced a lot of these screws and changed them to find the most suitable ones. You want some of these screws that, hold the pressure, hold the air inside to be very thick and strong. I'll pull one of these out just so you can see. These were actually given to me by the Coldplay, their guitarist, used these in his neck of his guitar to be super strong. So we have a nice thick screw into there, and a couple of these washers so that the wood isn't being affected. So you just kind of pull these half of the way out. Open it up, and here we go inside. Now, most importantly, you have the reeds, and a good harmonium. There's a lot of really cheapo harmoniums out there, ready-made, but those that want a proper classical instrument has to be custom made, because a lot of shops aren't just going to stock $2,000 pieces. So if you have a look at these reeds here, these are the ones, the ideal top shelf boutique reeds that everybody wants. These are the German jubilant reeds. As I explained before, the harmonium comes from Europe. So the harmonium shops and factories that originally created harmoniums made these amazingly strong reeds. So these especially have to be used in qawwali, so that when you play with a lot of air, a lot of attack, strong notes and strong chords, the notes won't bend when you pump harder. And that's quite common with the Palitana reeds, the Indian reeds that are used in more than 99% of harmoniums today. If you pump harder, the tune of that's coming out will bend, which is not so nice. So you're restricted to a certain level of intensity, while the qawwali harmonium has to be very dynamic. So we use all qawwali harmoniums, require these, and they're about 100 years old, so they're quite valuable. And it's one of the most expensive parts. But it's really the essence of where the sound comes from, the air coming through these reeds. And I also have harmoniums with 3 sets, which would be bass, male and female, so the different sizes, while having 2 sets like this and using a coupler gives that really rich mid-frequency that's best for qawwali. So if we look in here, we see that this is the internal body, and there's these little holes where the air is coming through from the bottom bellows. If we push through, we can feel that there's a piece of wood there with some springs under it that's pushing the air through these holes into the reeds. I know these are some basic things, but it's important that everybody knows this. Now, some of the augmentations I've had to do to my harmonium, if you come a little closer and have a look, I've done a lot of work to customize my harmonium so that it's best in my opinion. Now, some of the weak points that are typical is this portion here in the body, these bolts that go through the sides. Often, when taking lots of flights and stuff, it gets shooken up and then they get loose, and you're losing your seal there. So you can see on the outside here, I've put a really thick, sturdy copper bolt through it, and I've just drilled through there so that it holds it perfectly against the body, this inner box, and use these butterfly nuts so I can manually tighten it if it gets loose. And then if you're coming into here, you can see that I've done a similar thing. Now if you look at this portion here, you can see that it's also something that I've reinforced here, because the connection from this part of the box to the back can also get really wiggly and loose. So I've added these stronger bolts and these washers to keep it flush, and I have some rubber material there keeping it so it's got some wiggle room and vibration room. Since we're here, this is where the air is coming through, and then the excess air will go through these and be stored in the bottom, so that we always have enough air coming through the instrument when we need it. As you know, when you'll pump it and then might want to sing something with that hand, there's still air, so it doesn't have to be like a continuous pump. But that mostly depends on what's inside this box here with the springs. So we're going to open that up now and have a look. So now if we turn the harmonium upside down, I've actually replaced this piece of wood as well as many other parts and added these little legs so that there's some resonance in this wood here. It's a very fine wood, but very light. You want things to be light and thin. Then we just unscrew the bottom here to see what's inside. So now when all the screws are, you have to pull them all the way out. You can see that this here, without me opening this up too far, you can see inside that we have 1, 2, 3 springs. Now typically with a QAWWALI harmonium, you just have one big boss spring in the middle. There's the boss spring, it's very thick. But I like a lot of air, so I have really strong action, which makes it so it's a lot of work to pump. But then I always have heaps of air being pushed through the reeds, so I can play very fast, and the keys become very responsive, and that's what we really want. And so I've put these 2 thinner springs, they're bigger but thinner, gauge in there, and I've screwed them to the bottom and then taped them with gaffer tape and in an even way. So when you have all this pressure behind it, it makes it so there's less sustain. I mean, you get it to where you want it. Like I've even changed the springs a lot of times in here and used wire cutters to cut pieces off the springs to get them just right. Because when the springs are too loose, you're going to have a lot of air to play with, but there's not going to be enough pressure going through the reeds to really play hard. It'll just be not enough power. Well, if you have a lot of air, you get that pop, like all of the complete resonance of the reed and the body of the harmonium will be there. So that's why we have these heavier gauge springs in when it comes to QAWWALI playing. A lot of the classical harmoniums could have 2, for example, of the finer gauge yet bigger springs that push the air through. So we're going to close this up and move on to the important bit, which is the tuning of the harmonium. And that's a whole journey in itself that's extremely important. So tune in a little bit and we'll see what's inside the whole journey of the reeds and the tuning of them.